The first rays of dawn on May 28, 1918, cast long shadows across the war-torn French countryside as Major General Robert Lee Bullard stood atop a muddy observation post, his weathered hands gripping field glasses that revealed a sight no American commander had ever witnessed on European soil. Before him stretched the German-held village of Cantigny, its shattered buildings and defensive positions. Representing more than just another military objective, they symbolized America's first real test as an independent fighting force in the Great War. The morning mist clung to the cratered landscape like ghostly fingers, obscuring the movements of the 1st Infantry Division as they prepared for what would become the United States Army's first major offensive operation. In World War I, for months, American doughboys had served alongside French and British forces, earning their stripes in the trenches but never truly proving their mettle as an autonomous military power. That was about to change in the most dramatic fashion possible. Colonel Hanson Edward Ely, commanding the 28th Infantry Regiment, moved through the forward trenches with the quiet confidence of a man who understood the weight of history resting on his shoulders. His men, faces blackened with mud and determination, checked their Springfield rifles one final time. These weren't the green recruits who had sailed from New York Harbor months earlier. They were hardened veterans who had learned the brutal lessons of modern warfare. In the killing fields of France. The strategic importance of Cantigny extended far beyond its modest size. German forces had transformed the village into a formidable stronghold, complete with machine gun nests, artillery positions, and a network of trenches that commanded the surrounding terrain. More critically, the village sat astride key communication lines that German forces used to coordinate their spring offensive, which had brought their armies dangerously close to Paris itself. General John Joseph Pershing, commander of the American Expeditionary Forces, had insisted that American troops fight as an independent army rather than being absorbed piecemeal into allied units. This decision had created considerable tension with French Marshal Ferdinand Foch and British Field Marshal Douglas Haig, both of whom questioned whether American forces possessed the experience and capability to conduct major operations without direct Allied supervision. As referenced in contemporary accounts from the New York Times archives, the pressure on American forces was immense, with European newspapers openly speculating about the untested Americans' ability to face seasoned German troops in offensive operations. The stakes could not have been higher. Failure at Cantigny would validate Allied concerns and potentially force American forces into subordinate roles for the remainder of the war. The German defenders, primarily from the 82nd Reserve Division, had spent weeks preparing their positions, under the command of experienced officers who had survived 3 years of brutal warfare. They viewed the Americans as inexperienced newcomers who would break under the first serious pressure. Machine gun teams had carefully mapped killing fields. Artillery observers had registered every approach route, and reserve forces stood ready to launch immediate counterattacks. But as the minutes ticked toward 0 hour, something stirred in the American lines that the Germans had not anticipated. A fierce determination, born from national pride and the knowledge that they represented not just their regiment or division, but the entire United States of America. In its first independent military action on European soil, at exactly 5:45 in the morning, the earth itself seemed to convulse as American artillery batteries unleashed a devastating barrage that would echo across military history. Colonel Charles Pellet Summerall's Artillery Brigade, consisting of the 6th, 7th, and 12th Field Artillery Regiments, had spent days carefully plotting their fire missions, and now their shells screamed overhead like the wrath of an awakened giant. The bombardment was unlike anything the Americans had previously delivered. Instead of the scattered, ineffective fire that had characterized earlier attempts, this was a precisely orchestrated symphony of destruction. High explosive shells crashed into German trenches, while shrapnel rounds burst above the defenders' positions, sending deadly metal fragments raining down on anyone caught in the open. The thunder was so intense that it could be heard in Allied headquarters 20 miles away. Captain George Butler McMurtry, observing from a forward position, watched through his periscope as the German defenses disappeared under clouds of smoke and debris. The psychological effect was as important as the physical destruction. This massive display of American firepower announced to both friend and foe that the United States had arrived as a serious military power with the industrial capacity to support sustained offensive operations. German machine gunners huddled in their concrete bunkers as shells exploded around them. With clockwork precision, Sergeant Friedrich Müller, a veteran of Verdun and the Somme, later wrote in his diary that the American artillery fire was more systematic and terrifying than anything we faced from the French or British. The Americans had studied European artillery techniques for months and combined them with their own innovations to create a bombardment that maximized both destruction and demoralization. At 6:45, exactly 1 hour after the barrage began, the shells lifted and moved to targets deeper behind German lines. This was the signal Colonel Ellie's infantry had been waiting for. Whistles shrieked along the American trenches, and with a roar that competed with the artillery, the doughboys of the 28th Infantry Regiment went over the top in there. First Major Assault. Leading the charge was Captain Clarence Hubner, whose Alpha Company had been tasked with capturing the village's eastern approach. His men advanced in disciplined waves, their bayonets glinting in the morning sun as they crossed no man's land with a determination that surprised even their own officers. These soldiers had absorbed months of hard-learned lessons about trench warfare, and they moved with the fluid coordination of seasoned veterans. The German response was swift and deadly. Machine guns that had survived the barrage opened fire from concealed positions, their chattering rhythm cutting down the first wave of attackers. But instead of breaking and retreating as the defenders expected, the Americans adapted their tactics. On the spot, small groups of soldiers provided covering fire while others advanced by bounce, using shell craters and scattered debris for protection. Lieutenant Samuel Woodville, who would later receive the Medal of Honor for his actions that day, single-handedly eliminated 3 German machine gun positions using a combination of rifle fire and hand grenades. His methodical approach to clearing enemy strongpoints became a textbook example of individual initiative in offensive operations. As the first Americans reached the German trenches, the fighting became savage and personal. Bayonets clashed with rifle butts, grenades exploded in confined spaces, and the ancient brutality of hand-to-hand combat replaced the technological warfare of artillery and machine guns. The doughboys fought with a ferocity that shocked their German opponents, who had expected the Americans to falter when faced with the reality of close-quarters battle. By 8:30 in the morning, American flags flew over the ruins of Cantigny's main street, but the real test was just beginning. German doctrine called for immediate counterattacks to retake any lost ground, and Colonel Hans von Lossberg, the local German commander, had 3 reserve battalions positioned specifically for this purpose. The Americans had won the village, but holding it would prove far more challenging than capturing it. The German counterattack came with mechanical precision at 9:15. 3 companies of seasoned stormtroopers, supported by artillery fire from positions the Americans had not yet identified, advanced on Cantigny from 3 different directions simultaneously. These were not the demoralized defenders who had been driven from their trenches. They were a lead assault troop whose mission was to demonstrate that American victories would be temporary at best. Major Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of the former president and second in command of the 26th Infantry Regiment, had positioned his men in a defensive perimeter around the village's key positions. His soldiers, many of whom were experiencing their first major battle, showed remarkable composure as German shells began falling among their positions. The weeks of training under fire had transformed these young Americans into reliable combat soldiers. The first German assault wave struck the eastern edge of the village, where Captain Hubner's company had established defensive positions among the rubble of destroyed buildings. The fighting was immediate and intense, with Germans advancing through the ruins while Americans fired from improvised positions behind collapsed walls and shell craters. Machine gun teams from both sides engaged in deadly duels, with the advantage shifting back and forth as positions were overrun and retaken. Sergeant Alvin York, though more famous for later actions, distinguished himself during the Cantigny fighting by organizing a group of scattered soldiers into an effective defensive unit when their officer was wounded. His natural leadership abilities and calm demeanor under fire exemplified the adaptability that would characterize American forces. Throughout the war, the second German assault focused on the village's northern approach, where Lieutenant Colonel George Marshall had positioned the companies of the 18th Infantry Regiment. Marshall, who would later become one of America's greatest military leaders, demonstrated the tactical acumen that would define his career. By anticipating the German attack route and positioning his forces to maximize defensive firepower while minimizing exposure to enemy artillery, German stormtroopers advanced using infiltration tactics that had proven successful against French and British positions. But they encountered something unexpected: American soldiers who had studied these same tactics and developed countermeasures. Instead of linear defensive positions that could be penetrated and rolled up, the Americans had created mutually supporting strong points that could engage attackers from multiple angles. As detailed in a contemporary report from the Chicago Tribune's war correspondent, the fighting in Cantigny streets took on an almost medieval character, with individual buildings becoming fortresses that changed hands multiple times. American soldiers demonstrated remarkable tenacity, often fighting room by room and floor by floor to hold their positions against numerically superior German forces. The tide of battle turned when American artillery, now directed by observers who had advanced with the infantry, began delivering precise fire on German assembly areas. The same artillery coordination that had made the initial assault successful now proved equally effective in defensive operations, breaking up German attack formations before they could achieve local superiority. By noon, the German counterattacks had been repulsed, but at considerable cost to both sides. The Americans had proven they could not only capture enemy positions, but also hold them against determined counterattacks, a capability that Allied commanders had privately doubted. The afternoon of May 28th brought a different kind of challenge as German artillery commanders, frustrated by their infantry's failure to retake Cantigny, unleashed a concentrated bombardment designed to destroy the village and everyone in it. This was no longer about tactical advantage. It had become a test of wills between two military philosophies, with the Americans determined to prove their staying power and the Germans equally committed to demonstrating that American success would be short-lived. The German artillery barrage that began at 2 o'clock was methodical and devastating. Heavy howitzers, positioned in concealed positions up to 10 miles away, began systematically destroying every building in Cantigny, while simultaneously targeting the communication trenches that connected the village to American rear areas. The message was clear: if the Germans could not retake the village by assault, they would make it uninhabitable for its American occupiers. Colonel Ely established his command post in what remained of Cantigny's church, its thick stone walls providing some protection against shell fragments. From this position, he coordinated the defense while maintaining communication with divisional headquarters through a combination of telephone lines, runners, and even carrier pigeons when conventional communication methods failed. The psychological pressure on American forces was immense. Many of these soldiers had never experienced such concentrated artillery fire, and the constant noise, dust, and threat of sudden death tested their resolve in ways that training could never fully prepare them for. Yet rather than breaking under the strain, the Americans adapted with remarkable resilience, creating improvised shelters and maintaining their positions despite the hellish conditions. Private John Smith from Ohio, writing in a letter home that would later be published in the Cleveland Plain Dealer, described the experience. The shells came down like rain, but we held our ground because we knew the whole world was watching to see if Americans could fight. This sentiment, repeated in countless personal accounts, captured the unique pressure American forces felt. As representatives of their nation's military capability, German observation aircraft, flying at dangerous low altitudes despite American anti-aircraft fire, directed the artillery barrage with increasing accuracy. Buildings that had provided cover for American positions were systematically destroyed, forcing defenders to relocate repeatedly while maintaining their hold on the village's key terrain features. The American response to this artillery challenge demonstrated both tactical innovation and stubborn determination. Instead of concentrating in large groups that would present attractive targets, small teams of soldiers established defensive positions throughout the ruins, creating a network of mutually supporting positions that could not be eliminated by artillery fire alone. Captain McMurtry, commanding Delta Company, 28th Infantry, organized his men into what he called fighting holes, individual positions dug into rubble and debris that could shelter 1 or 2 soldiers, while providing effective firing positions. This decentralized approach to defense proved so effective that it would later be adopted as standard doctrine for urban warfare operations. The medical challenge was equally severe. Battalion Surgeon Major James Robertson established an aid station in Cantigny's basement levels, treating wounded soldiers under conditions that would have challenged peacetime hospitals. His efforts to maintain medical care under constant artillery fire exemplified the professionalism that American forces brought to every aspect of military operations. As evening approaches, the German artillery fire gradually decreased in intensity. not because their objectives had been achieved, but because ammunition supplies were running low. The Americans had absorbed the worst the Germans could deliver and maintained their hold on every major position in the village. More importantly, they had demonstrated the kind of resilience under fire that would characterize American military performance for the remainder of the war. The dawn of May 29th revealed a transformed landscape where American soldiers had not merely survived their first major test, but had fundamentally altered the strategic dynamics of the Western Front. As morning patrols moved through the still smoking ruins of Cantigny, Colonel Ely could see evidence of a victory that transcended mere tactical success. This was the moment when American forces announced their arrival as full partners in the Allied war effort. The German withdrawal during the night had been orderly but decisive. Reconnaissance teams reported that enemy forces had fallen back to secondary defensive positions, approximately 2 miles east of the village, abandoning equipment and supplies that spoke to the thoroughness of their defeat. More significantly, intercepted German radio communications revealed a new tone of respect for American military capabilities that had been entirely absent from previous assessments. General Pershing arrived at the battlefield on the morning of May 30th, accompanied by French Marshal Foch and British General Sir Henry Rawlinson. The presence of these senior Allied commanders, at what might have seemed a relatively minor engagement, underscored the broader significance of Cantigny's capture. For months, European military leaders had questioned American readiness for independent operations. Those questions had now been definitively answered. The casualty reports told a sobering story of the price paid for this validation. The 1st Infantry Division had suffered over 1,000 casualties in capturing and holding Cantigny, including nearly 200 killed in action. Yet these losses, while tragic, compared favorably to similar operations conducted by Allied forces earlier in the war, demonstrating that American tactical methods could achieve objectives without the massive casualties that had characterized previous Western Front battles. Among the wounded was Lieutenant Samuel Parker, whose actions in organizing the defense of the village's southern sector had prevented a German breakthrough during the most critical phase of the battle. Parker's innovative use of interlocking fields of fire and his ability to coordinate artillery support from a forward position exemplified the kind of tactical leadership that American forces would provide throughout the remainder of the conflict. The strategic implications of Cantigny extended far beyond the immediate military situation. German military intelligence assessments, captured weeks later during subsequent operations, revealed that the American performance had forced a fundamental reassessment of German defensive priorities. Resources that had been allocated to other sectors were now being redirected to face what German commanders recognized as a new and formidable opponent. French public opinion, as reflected in contemporary newspaper accounts from Le Figaro and other major publications, underwent a dramatic shift in its perception of American military effectiveness. Where skepticism and condescension had previously characterized French attitudes toward their newest ally, genuine respect and appreciation now dominated public discourse. This transformation in Allied public opinion would prove crucial in maintaining coalition unity during the challenging months ahead. The technological lessons learned at Cantigny proved equally significant. American artillery techniques, which had combined European experience with American industrial innovation, had demonstrated effectiveness that surpassed traditional methods. The coordination between infantry and artillery that had characterized the Cantigny operation became a model for subsequent American offensive operations. Throughout 1918, Colonel Summerall's artillery brigade had fired over 15,000 rounds during the 3-day battle, maintaining a rate of fire and accuracy that impressed even veteran French artillery officers. The American ability to manufacture and deliver such quantities of ammunition while maintaining precision fire control represented a new dimension in military capability that would become increasingly important as the war progressed. Intelligence gathered from captured German positions revealed the extent to which American tactical methods had surprised enemy commanders. Documents found in abandoned headquarters indicated that German forces had expected American attacks to follow British or French patterns, allowing for prepared defensive responses. Instead, they had encountered tactical innovations that combined the best elements of Allied experience with uniquely American approaches to military problem-solving. The news of Cantigny's capture reached American shores through telegraph cables that carried more th and simple military dispatches they transmitted the first definitive proof that American soldiers could meet European armies on equal terms and emerge victorious. In newspaper offices from New York to San Francisco, editors struggled to convey the magnitude of what this small French village represented for America's emergence as a global military power. The New York Times devoted its entire front page to the Cantigny victory on June 1, 1918, with headlines that proclaimed American arms triumph in first independent action. The article, based on dispatches from war correspondent Richard Harding Davis, described scenes of American soldiers raising the stars and stripes over enemy positions, while German prisoners expressed grudging admiration for their captors' fighting abilities. President Woodrow Wilson, speaking to a joint session of Congress on June 3rd, used the Cantigny victory to justify his decision to maintain American forces as an independent army rather than allowing them to be absorbed into Allied units. "Our boys have proven," Wilson declared, "that American democracy can produce soldiers second to none in courage, skill, and determination." The political implications of this military success would resonate throughout the remainder of the war and beyond. In German newspapers, heavily censored but still revealing, the tone of coverage reflected a military establishment coming to terms with a new reality. The Frankfurter Zeitung, in a carefully worded editorial, acknowledged that American forces have demonstrated tactical competence that exceeds our initial assessments, language that in the context of German military culture represented a significant admission of respect for enemy capabilities. The impact on American military doctrine was immediate and profound. Training programs at camps across the United States were revised to incorporate lessons learned at Cantigny, with particular emphasis on the coordination between infantry and artillery that had proven so effective. Young officers studying at West Point and other military institutions analyzed the battle in detail, understanding that Cantigny represented a new chapter in American military methodology. French Marshal Ferdinand Foch, initially skeptical of American military capabilities, privately acknowledged in correspondence with the French Ministry of War that American forces have demonstrated tactical sophistication and fighting spirit that compares favorably with our most experienced divisions. This admission from one of Europe's most respected military leaders carried enormous weight in Allied strategic planning for the remainder of the war. The psychological impact on German military planning became evident in subsequent intelligence reports that revealed significant reallocations of resources to face American forces. Divisions that had been positioned against French and British sectors were moved to confront American units, a clear indication that German high command now viewed American forces as a primary threat rather than a secondary concern. General Erich Ludendorff, the German quartermaster general and de facto military leader, ordered a comprehensive analysis of American tactical methods following Cantigny. The resulting report, captured by Allied intelligence later in the war, revealed German recognition that American forces combined European tactical lessons with industrial capabilities and individual initiative in ways that created new challenges for traditional German defensive methods. The economic implications of Cantigny's success were equally significant. American industrial production, already operating at unprecedented levels to support the war effort, received additional investment as the government and private industry recognized that military success justified continued expansion of manufacturing capabilities. Factories producing artillery shells, rifles, and other military equipment increased production schedules to meet the demands of an army that had proven its effectiveness on European battlefields. In Britain, the Times of London published an editorial that marked a fundamental shift in British attitudes toward their American allies, where previous coverage had emphasized American inexperience and dependence on European guidance. The post-Cantigny editorial praised our American cousins' remarkable adaptation to modern warfare and their demonstration of fighting qualities that honor the English-speaking peoples. As summer deepened into the campaigning season of 1918, the Battle of Cantigny continued to reverberate through American military culture and national consciousness in ways that would shape the United States' approach to warfare for generations to come. The small French village had become more than a tactical victory. It represented America's graduation from regional power to global military force. With all the responsibilities and opportunities that such status entailed, the officers who had led American forces at Cantigny would go on to shape military doctrine and strategy throughout the 20th century. Colonel George Marshall, whose defensive arrangements had proven crucial in holding the village against German Counterattacks would later become Army Chief of Staff during World War II and architect of the Marshall Plan that rebuilt post-war Europe. His experiences at Cantigny informed his understanding of how American military power could be effectively projected overseas while maintaining democratic values and civilian control. Major General Robert Bullard, the division commander whose insistence on thorough preparation had made the Cantigny victory possible, established training programs that emphasized the kind of combined arms coordination that had proven so effective in the battle. These programs, implemented at military installations across the United States, created a generation of officers who understood how to integrate infantry, artillery, and support elements into effective fighting formations. The tactical innovations demonstrated at Cantigny became foundational elements of American military doctrine, the decentralized defensive methods that had allowed American forces to hold the village against concentrated German attacks influenced urban warfare training that would prove vital in subsequent conflicts from World War II through modern counterinsurgency operations. American military schools began teaching what became known as the Cantigny method of combining centralized planning with decentralized execution. The international implications of Cantigny's success extended far beyond immediate military considerations. European powers, which had previously viewed the United States as a regional power with limited capacity for overseas military operations, now recognize America as a potential global hegemon whose industrial capacity and military effectiveness could reshape international relations. This recognition would influence diplomatic negotiations throughout the remainder of World War I and the subsequent peace settlement. The psychological impact on American society proved equally transformative. Citizens who had questioned whether their democratic institutions could produce effective military forces now possessed tangible proof that American soldiers could match any army in the world. This confidence would influence American foreign policy decisions throughout the 20th century, providing the psychological foundation for America's willingness to engage in overseas military operations from World War II through the present day. German military leaders, studying the battle's lessons in the aftermath of their defeat, recognized that Cantigny represented a fundamental shift in the war's strategic balance. The arrival of large numbers of well-trained, well-equipped American forces meant that Germany's hopes for victory through attrition were no longer viable. This recognition would influence German decision-making throughout the remainder of 1918, contributing to the armistice negotiations that ended the war. The economic legacy of Cantigny extended beyond immediate military considerations to encompass America's emergence as the world's dominant industrial power. The battle demonstrated that American manufacturing capabilities could support large-scale military operations overseas while maintaining domestic economic growth. This lesson would prove crucial during World War II, when American industry simultaneously supported Allied forces worldwide and maintained civilian prosperity at home. In the decades following World War I, military historians would recognize Cantigny as the moment when American military culture achieved full maturity. The battle combined European tactical lessons with American organizational abilities and individual initiative in ways that created new possibilities for military effectiveness. Veterans of Cantigny would carry these lessons into civilian careers, where they applied military organizational principles to business, government, and social institutions. The Battle of Cantigny thus marked more than a tactical victory in a single engagement. It represented America's transformation from a nation that fought defensive wars on its own continent to a global power, capable of projecting military force anywhere in the world. The village's capture announced to friend and foe alike that the United States had arrived as a full participant in international affairs, with the military capabilities necessary to support its diplomatic and economic interests on a global scale. This account draws upon contemporary reports from major American and European newspapers, including the New York Times, the Times of London, and Le Figaro, as well as official military records from the National Archives and personal accounts from veterans of the 1st Infantry Division.